Hello and welcome to another segment of Musicians Speak with your host, Joseph Celli, where I have the opportunity to meet with new music creators of all genres and discuss their work. I'm very happy to be speaking with guitarist, composer, and band leader Mary Halvorson. And before we say hello to Mary, let's open with a cut from her brand new release on Nonesuch Records from a performance of her Amaryllis. just heard Amaryllis from Mary Halvorson's release entitled Amaryllis. I've had the opportunity to hear Mary in person several times this year in a really exquisite duo with Joe Morris, also a performance with Tomas Fujiwara's group. Additionally, I've been featuring a number of her releases over the years, including her work with Thumbscrew Trio and her Code Girl release on my radio programs. So it's really a great pleasure to be able to speak to her at this time about her double release of the albums entitled Amaryllis and Belladonna. Hello, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful day in Connecticut, and I had a few minutes to go down by Seaside Park and do a couple of laps around the track, so I'm feeling really great.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it's beautiful in Brooklyn as well.
Good. I see that since the relaxation of COVID, that you seem to be as active as ever with performances in Germany, Canada, United States, with Thumbscrew and others, as well as the release of the 2 new recordings. It looks like you spent your time very creatively during the COVID lockdown.
I tried to. I mean, it was a strange period, just obviously completely unprecedented, and I think everybody was in shock. So, I had loads of time, more time than I've ever had to sit down and write, but it was also adjusting to the whole thing and the rhythm. I found I was in a very different rhythm at that period. So, some days just having trouble feeling motivated to do anything at all, and then kind of having almost feverish spurts of productivity.
Well, from the slew of CDs that we've been receiving, it seems like creative people like yourself really use that time as a very focused. I know that when I spoke recently with Wadado Leo Smith, he said it was just fantastic for him because he wasn't traveling and spending time sitting around airports.
Yep.
He said it was one of the greatest creative periods. And of course, during this past year, his 80th birthday, he released 19 CDs.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that many. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was the 80th anniversary celebration, but he just came out with a 4 CD set of his string quartets.
Oh, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear that.
It would be helpful for our listeners if they had a little context about your background, maybe where you were from, some of your training. Might you give us some background about what you've done, Mary?
Sure. So I grew up mostly in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Uh-huh.
Let's see, I started on violin. I switched to guitar around 11 years old because I fell in love with Jimi Hendrix and started studying jazz guitar from there. In high school, I got really into jazz. And then I went to Wesleyan University in your home state, Connecticut, and studied with Anthony Braxton there. Also with the guitarist Joe Morris, who's a Connecticut resident.
Yeah.
And just got really into all types of music from there, branching out from jazz into all kinds of improvised, creative, modern music. And then I moved to Brooklyn, New York after college, and I've been there ever since.
Well, Wesleyan has always been such a progressive place for music, with people like extended residencies in the past with John Cage, with people like Alvin Lucier, and of course Anthony Braxton, and so many others in so many areas of music. Many of the new music people these days seem to have been inspired by your former teacher, Anthony Braxton. Might you give us and our listeners a little insight about maybe his impact on you and your development?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't overstate the impact he had. I mean, to the point of saying I wouldn't be a musician today if it weren't for Anthony Braxton.
Wow.
And, anybody who's met him, and I don't know, have you met Anthony?
Yes, I produced some of his events at Real Art Ways decades ago.
Oh, great. So you kind of know, but he's just such a powerful presence and such an inspiring, magnetic person to be around. And if you look at his body of work and the scope of what he's done and what he continues to do, to me, it just really opened up this idea that music can be anything. And there's no limits or labels, and it's creativity, and you can do whatever you want. And I think being around him at Wesleyan and absorbing all of his music and just seeing the scope of what's possible, I think that's what really inspired me to continue with music. And I do believe that's why he's really fostered a generation or several generations of creative musicians.
Well, you said you can do anything you want, but your music seems so disciplined in so many ways. I mean, it's expansive. You're working in many, many different avenues, but I never felt it was like sort of just doing whatever you want. I felt there was like a real kind of discipline to what you were doing.
Well, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think when I say do whatever you want, what I mean is not putting limits on yourself in terms of music should sound like this, or it should, or having some expectation of a box that should fit in, or what it needs to be. I think that was what I learned from Anthony, because another thing about him is he loved music of all styles, all genres. He was so excited about all kinds of music. And so his thing was really, you can take from whatever you want, but you don't have to be contained by it either. And so I think, and he's very disciplined. I mean, my God, I think he's writing like a 12 opera cycle right now. So definitely his work ethic was another thing that was inspiring to me.
Yeah, I think it's so important for our listeners to know that people like Anthony and so many of the musicians that we love, our musicians have really big ears. And I don't mean that in a physical manner. I mean that in terms of absorbing the music of the world. That on one hand, when I spoke to Bill Frisell last week, he was talking about going back and listening to he said revolutionary Louis Armstrong. And for our listeners, some of the music that Mary is making and Anthony Braxton is making is going to be very new to you. But Louis Armstrong in his day was very, very new to what he was doing. So I hope our listeners can also begin to develop big ears for some of the music that we're presenting here. Initially, these two simultaneous releases seem to be opposites, with Amaryllis primarily based on your improvisatory sextet and Belladonna comprised of 5 composed works for string quartet with guitar. Can you talk about maybe the contrast between the two of those, but also maybe you have some similarities that we should be listening for?
I definitely think of the projects as related, and partly just because I was working on the music during the same time. But they're related in a sense. I mean, the first similarity is that the Mivos Quartet, the string quartet, appears on both records. So the one record, Belladonna, is, as you said, through composed string parts with myself on guitar, playing sometimes composed parts and sometimes adding improvisations to the quartets. And then my sextet of trumpet, trombone, guitar, vibraphone, bass, and drums. And Mivos appears on half of that, so augments the sextet with string parts on half the record. So while there is a lot more improvisation in the Amaryllis music, I think there is some similarity, just Mivos being almost the connecting glue, but also just that I was in the same headspace when I wrote the music, and the same emotional space, the same period of time. And so I think even though they're very different sound palettes, I think there probably is a similarity just of energy amongst the two. But, that probably is subjective.
Right. Well, during the course of this program, we'll have an opportunity to hear music from both of the CDs. So, Mary, shall we give another listen to another cut from Amaryllis, the release on Nonesuch Records? What do you think about possibly our giving a listen to Night Shift?
Great.
Yeah. And who are the musicians we'll be hearing on this? And I'm not so aware of your using trombone or vibes in your other groups. Is this a first for you?
For vibraphone, it's a first for me in terms of having a vibraphonist in one of my bands, and that's Patricia Brennan, the vibraphonist. Trombone, I have worked with before in my septet and octet, and it's actually the same trombonist, Jacob Garchik. Right. And both of those two musicians are featured on Night Shift. They both have solos. And the other musicians are Adam O'Farrell on trumpet, Nick Dunston on bass, and Tomas Fujiwara on drums.
Okay, let's give a listen to Mary Halvorson's new release, Night Shift, from the new Nonesuch release, Amaryllis. We've been listening to Mary Halvorson's Amaryllis release on Nonesuch Records, and the cut we heard was Night Shift. The recording features Mary as guitarist-composer on all the pieces of the recording, with Patricia Brennan on vibes, Nick Dunston on bass, Tomas Fujiwara on drums, Jacob Garchik on trombone, and Adam O'Farrell on trumpet. My name is Joseph Celli, and I'm glad to be spending a few minutes with guitarist-composer, band leader, Mary Halvorson. Mary, up to now we've been listening to the sextet on Amaryllis, but let's talk a little bit about the Belladonna release in which you work with the Mivos String Quartet. What was the inspiration for you? I believe this is your first string quartet composition, isn't it?
It is, and I've always loved string quartets. I think it's just such a beautiful sound. And when you get a really good string quartet like the Mivos Quartet, to my ears, it sounds like one giant instrument, and they're just so in tune. And yeah, I've just always loved that sound. And I think also in some way, it's probably me circling back to my origins of starting music as a violinist, as a 7-year-old. And, you know, I stepped away from the violin, but I think there is some love of that instrument going way back. And then, you know, having the time finally during the COVID lockdown to really do some research and learning and experimenting and put some dedicated time into how I would go about writing for a string quartet.
Well, the other day when you talk about stepping back, I was so happy to once again reacquaint myself with the Budapest String Quartet playing Bartók string quartets. Do you know those quartets?
I do, yeah. I love Bartók.
Fantastic music, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the string quartet parts, are they thoroughly composed, or do the string players also improvise?
On Belladonna?
Yeah.
They are almost exclusively through composed, although I've started writing a little bit more and have added a little bit of improvisation for them as well, because the players in Mivos are also great improvisers.
And your part is totally improvised, or?
No, it's not. It's actually probably about half and half. I have written components in the guitar part as well, but there's also a guitar improvisation in every composition. So I kind of weave in and out of playing composed parts and improvising on the guitar. I see.
And of course, my being Italian, I love the name Belladonna that translates to pretty women. And where did that title come from?
So actually, it does, but the reference that I was thinking about is Deadly Nightshade, which, you know, Belladonna being a type of amaryllis, which is, I'm obsessed with this idea of poisonous plants. So things that are both beautiful and deeply poisonous.
How about poisonous mushrooms?
Maybe that'll be the next record.
Yeah, I do a lot of foraging with my wife for wild mushrooms up in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and we're always having to be careful about wild poisonous mushrooms. Are there any opportunities coming up for us to hear performances with you and the Mivos Quartet together, performing some of this music?
The next one that I know about is going to be in December. And that is in New Jersey on, I think, December 17th and 18th. I'll be doing performances with both groups, actually.
Well, it would be great if we could get Firehouse 12 to produce a concert of all of that in their renovated space, or maybe even a larger space. It would be fantastic to hear it up here in Connecticut.
Absolutely.
And
you never know. Maybe that'll happen.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I know that you've been interviewed innumerable times, but I wonder if there is anything that you would like to talk about, Mary, that maybe hasn't been asked of you or that's on your mind at the moment.
That's a good question.
Yeah, well, you know,
I don't know.
We interview people. We always come up with the same questions. So there's probably a lot that you have to offer that we don't even think about asking. Is there anything that is sort of like important to you that we should be talking about?
In terms of these records?
Well, in terms of these records or life in general.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a big question. Gee, I don't know. Okay. I guess
we'll save that for another
I could probably
interview.
come up with something, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the records, at least I'll say this, is that I feel a lot of momentum with these groups, and I actually have been continuing to compose for both groups. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely, even though the records are already out, it's definitely something that's still very much in the forefront of my brain. And there's something really nice about once you've recorded with a group and really gotten to know a group and done a lot of performances, you almost have an edge up writing because you can more easily envision what it sounds like. So that's something I've been thinking about as well, just the difference between groups that are entirely new and then groups that you become more comfortable with and what that brings to the table. So my head's been very much still in these groups and thinking about the next steps.
Yeah, it's interesting to our listeners that musicians, what Mary's talking about, they're innumerable string quartets out there. There's a lot of them. But oftentimes a composer will develop a relationship, and that relationship is a musical relationship, but also sometimes a personal and a spiritual relationship between them. And that's why you see things like, for instance, the Cronus String Quartet working with Terry Riley for over 40 years and premiering so many of his pieces. And there's a depth of that relationship that goes beyond the music notation or words that they convey. Mary, I thought we would go out with you in the Mivos String Quartet and you performing Moonburn from the Belladonna release. Is there anything you'd like to mention about this piece before we spin it?
Actually, this is one of my favorite pieces on the record. Okay. And my idea for this was a really slow developing theme. I mean, if you listen to at least the second violin part anyway, is very repetitive, but there's all kinds of stuff morphing and growing and changing around it. So with this one, I was really thinking about patience and slow development and getting to a very different place at the end of the piece, but gradually.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity today, but especially for giving us a relentless outpouring of creativity over the years that has really enriched our musical experiences. Thank you so very much, Mary.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the interview.
And before we close out with a performance of Moonburn from the new Nonesuch release entitled Belladonna, I want to thank everyone for listening. And if you want to hear other interviews and podcasts in this Musicians Speak series, including folks like Bill Frisell, Wadada Leo Smith, Chris Davis, Ingrid Laubrock, and many others, please visit the website at josephcelli.org. That's Joseph, CELLI.org. Thanks again, and here's Mary's composition, Moonburn.